COVID Tales, Lieutenant Soul. Tale 1. The Conspiracy Boy. The world was a conspiracy. At least, that's what I believed. It was the only thing that made sense of the mess we were living in. I sat in the silent gloom of my room, the only light coming from the laptop screen glowing in front of me. The digital clock in the corner of my monitor read 11:47 p.m. The rest of the house was a tomb. My sister Maya was probably dreaming about unicorns or something equally stupid. My dad, Mark, was snoring with the force of a diesel engine in the next room, and my mom, Sarah, was likely passed out on the sofa, a book still clutched in her hand. They didn't get it. They didn't see the strings being pulled. The whole world had gone insane a year ago, shutting down, locking up, all because of a virus that felt more like a ghost story than a real disease. It was a pandemic, they said, a once-in-a-lifetime event, a great reset. That last part was my favorite. It was the official term for what I saw as an obvious power grab, a way to control people, to make them dependent, to force them to bend to the will of the state. I scrolled through the headlines of a subreddit I frequented. Globalists push for New World Order. Mandates are a trial run for total control. What are they really injecting us with? A new post caught my eye. Teachers' union agrees to mandate. My blood ran cold. My mom was a teacher. She loved her job, but she also loved the rules. She believed in science, in experts, in everything that I'd come to distrust. She saw the news and heard the official story, and that was that. No questions asked. I shut the laptop with a frustrated snap, plunging my room back into darkness. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. The moment the ghost story was about to get real. The next morning, the house was alive with the mundane rhythm I'd come to despise. The smell of frying eggs mixed with the sickly sweet scent of Maya's bubblegum cereal. I walked into the kitchen, my eyes still heavy from the late-night scrolling session, and sat down at the table, picking at a piece of toast. My dad, Mark, was already dressed in his work clothes, a faded flannel shirt and paint-splattered jeans, staring blankly at the sports highlights on the TV mounted in the corner. Mom, Sarah, was at the stove, humming some old pop song, a picture of domestic tranquility that felt completely at odds with my mental state. "Hey, sleepyhead," Maya chirped, shoveling a spoonful of Technicolor marshmallows into her mouth. "Don't tell me you were up all night reading your spooky stories again." I shot her a glare. "They're not spooky stories, Maya. They're news." She just rolled her eyes, her spoon clattering against the bowl. "Whatever. It's not like any of it's real." "It is real," I mumbled, but my voice lacked conviction. It was a well-worn argument between us, one that always ended with her shrugging me off and me feeling even more isolated in my beliefs. Just then, Mom turned from the stove, a spatula in her hand. "All right, everyone, finish up. We've all got a big day." I opened my mouth, ready to drop the bomb about the teachers' union, but she spoke first, her tone light and casual. "So, good news. I got the email. We're having a special faculty meeting this week to talk about the new health requirements." My heart began to pound against my ribs. "The vaccine mandate?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled, oblivious to my panic. "Yeah, I guess you could call it that. It's nothing to worry about. Just the new policy. They want everyone on staff to have their shots by the end of the month. It's all scientifically approved, you know, just like a flu shot." She said the last part with a reassuring nod, as if that simple phrase could erase months of online theories and fear. "Mom, you can't," I said, my voice rising. "Don't you see? This is what they've been leading up to. It's a way to control us. The government, the pharmaceutical companies. They're working together. I've read about it. There's so much stuff online about what's really in those things." My dad, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, not looking away from the TV. "Alex, stop. You're getting worked up over nothing. Your mother's a professional. She knows what's best." "But Dad, they're not telling us everything," I pleaded, turning to him. "There are people who get it and start acting weird, like they're not even themselves anymore." Maya snorted with laughter. "You mean like zombies? Seriously, Alex?" My mom sighed, putting the spatula down. Her face softened, but there was a hint of exasperation in her eyes. Alex, honey, those are just stories. It's fear-mongering. I know you spend a lot of time on the internet, but you have to know the difference between a rumor and a fact. This is for our safety and for the safety of the students. It's a responsible thing to do. I felt a surge of frustration so powerful it almost made me want to scream. They were blind. They were all so blind. I knew I couldn't convince them with words. When are you doing it? I asked, the fight draining out of me. Next Thursday, she said. The school's setting up a clinic. It'll be quick and easy. Thursday. 7 days. 7 days for me to find a way to stop her, to prove that the world wasn't as simple as they believed it was. I looked at my mom, a woman I loved and trusted, and in my mind, she was already a ghost. The next 6 days blurred into a desperate, feverish haze for me. I became a digital ghost, haunting the darkest corners of the internet. I downloaded PDFs of what I believed were censored scientific papers. I watched grainy videos of people post-vaccine, their limbs twitching, their eyes distant and glassy. I even found a forum dedicated to collecting testimonials from people who claimed their loved ones had changed after their shots, accounts of strange tics, sudden mood swings, and terrifying aggression. Each morning, I'd try to present a new piece of proof to my mom. Look at this, Mom, I'd plead, holding up my phone. This guy's wife started saying she was being followed by shadows after her shot. She'd just pat my hand, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. Alex, that's just a story from some random person online. It's not real. Another time I showed her a diagram I found of a supposed nanochip, claiming it was being secretly injected. She laughed and told me it looked like something from a science fiction movie. My dad, Mark, mostly ignored my frantic attempts, but on the third day, he finally lost his patience. Enough, Alex, he said, his voice hard. Your mother has made her decision. Now you have to respect it. I was running out of time and options. My sister Maya had stopped teasing me and started just looking at me with concern. She didn't believe in my theories, but she could see the toll they were taking on me. I felt completely alone, screaming into a void while my family went about their lives, deaf and blind to the approaching storm. The night before the appointment, I stayed up late, staring at the ceiling. I had failed. There was nothing left to do. The panic was a cold stone in my stomach. Thursday arrived with a heavy gray sky, mirroring my mood. The air felt thick and still. Mom came home from her appointment around noon. It's done, she said, her voice cheerful as she dropped her keys in the bowl by the door. It barely hurt. See? She held up her arm, a tiny circular bandage on her bicep. I just stared at it, a bandage that felt like a marker of a point of no return. Later that afternoon, something small but chilling happened. My mom was grading papers at the kitchen table, and I was doing my homework nearby. She stopped, staring at her own hand. I watched as her fingers began to twitch, just a tiny, involuntary spasm. It lasted for a second, then stopped. She shook her hand and went back to work. I felt a knot form in my throat. Then, a few minutes later, she suddenly looked up from her papers and stared at the kitchen window. Did you hear that? She whispered, her eyes wide. Hear what? I asked. That, she said, pointing a finger at the window. That scratching. I listened, but heard nothing. There's nothing there, Mom, I said, my heart starting to race. She shook her head slowly. I could have sworn I heard something scratching at the glass. She returned to her work, but her eyes kept darting back to the window. I knew in that moment that my worst fears were starting to come true. It wasn't a conspiracy anymore. It was real. And it was just beginning. The subtle changes in my mom, Sarah, were no longer just twitching fingers and imagined sounds. They grew more frequent and more unsettling. I started keeping a mental log of them. A few days after her shot, I found her standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the countertop with a vacant look in her eyes. Mom? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond. I had to touch her arm to snap her out of it. She blinked, her eyes clearing. Oh, honey. Sorry. Just Lost my place, she said, but her expression was one of genuine confusion, not just a momentary distraction. Later that week, she asked my dad, Mark, where the car was parked when it was right in the driveway. She would start a sentence and forget what she was talking about mid-thought, her words trailing off into a vacant silence. The most unnerving thing was how she'd suddenly become fascinated by mundane objects. She spent 10 minutes just looking at a stack of mail on the counter, turning the envelopes over and over in her hands as if she'd never seen them before. I tried to talk to my dad about it, but he just brushed me off. She's just stressed, Alex. Teaching's a hard job. She's been working a lot. Dad, she's not just stressed. She's forgetting things. She's acting strange, I insisted, my voice tight with fear. He didn't even look up from his phone. She got a shot, not a lobotomy. She's fine. His dismissal was like a punch to the gut. The more I tried to make them see, the more I felt like the crazy one. My sister Maya noticed it too, but she didn't know what to make of it. She would just look at me with wide, frightened eyes whenever Mom did something odd. The tension in our house became a palpable thing. It hung in the air, a silent observer to my mom's slow, terrifying descent. She was still my mom. She'd laugh at my jokes, and she'd ask about my day. But it was like a faulty connection, a signal that was dropping in and out. The person I knew was still in there, but parts of her were fading away, being replaced by something else, something cold and distant. I was a helpless witness, watching the person I loved most in the world turn into a stranger, and no one else seemed to notice. Part 2. The contagion spreads. The tension in the house was a suffocating blanket, made even thicker by the news my dad, Mark, brought home a week later. He walked in, tossing his hard hat onto the kitchen counter with a grunt. "They're doing it too," he said, and I knew instantly what he meant. The construction company had made the vaccine a requirement. A cold dread settled in my stomach. "Dad, don't," I pleaded, the words a desperate whisper. "Look at what's happening to Mom. Please, don't do it." He didn't even look at me. "Your mom's just a little tired, Alex. It's a busy time of year. Don't be ridiculous." He said the last part with a finality that slammed the door on any more discussion. I watched him go through with it the following week. He came home, a fresh bandage on his arm, and a false sense of relief on his face. "See? Nothing to it," he said, giving me a smug look. For the first couple of days he seemed fine. Then the subtle changes began. The first thing I noticed was his temper. My dad was a laid-back guy, a little gruff, but rarely angry. Now he'd snap at Maya for leaving her shoes in the hall, his voice a low, threatening growl. He'd slam doors and throw things. He looked at us sometimes, at Maya and me, like we were strangers he barely tolerated. Then came the physical stuff. He'd sit on the sofa, his hands twitching in his lap, a mirror of what I'd seen in my mom. He started forgetting things too, but unlike Mom's vacant confusion, his was laced with a chilling aggression. He'd accuse my mom of moving his keys or tools, his face red with a rage that was completely out of character. My mom's symptoms, meanwhile, had gotten worse. She was no longer just staring into space. Sometimes she'd stare at us, her gaze empty and flat. One evening, she asked Maya to pass her the salt, but she used a word I'd never heard her use before. It was a guttural sound, like a piece of an old, rusted machine turning over. We all froze. Mom just blinked, then tried to say salt again, the word coming out right this time, but the sound was still stuck in my head. The two of them, my parents, were becoming a frightening pair. They'd sit at the dinner table in a strange, uneasy silence, their hands twitching, their eyes distant. It was as if they were both listening to something we couldn't hear. I knew in my gut that the time for reason and pleading was over. I was a teenager trapped in a horror movie, and the monsters were my own parents. With the announcement that schools were preparing for student vaccinations, a new, more terrifying reality set in. They weren't just changing, they were coming for us next. The moment of truth came 2 nights later. Dinner was an agonizing affair, a silent tableau of simmering dread. The parents, Mark and Sarah, were a picture of perfect, empty calm. Their recent fits of temper and strange tics were gone, replaced by a chilling serenity. It was the kind of unnerving quiet that came before a storm. I kept my eyes on my plate, but I could feel them watching me, their gazes like cold weights on my skin. My dad finally cleared his throat, the sound a jarring interruption to the silence. "We have some good news," he said, his voice as flat and emotionless as a newscaster. "The school board has finalized the new health policy for all students." My sister Maya looked up, her spoon halfway to her mouth. She glanced at me, and I saw a flicker of confusion and fear in her eyes. She was still a kid, and the calm, reassuring tone of our parents was confusing her. She wanted to believe them. My mom picked up where he left off, her words precise and rehearsed. "You'll both be getting your shots next week. They're making a special clinic at the high school. It's a wonderful thing for the health of the community. For all of us." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her expression was like a mask, perfect and still. "No," I said, the word a raw, involuntary protest. My dad's gaze landed on me, and a shiver ran down my spine. His eyes held no anger, no warmth, just a terrifyingly blank focus. "It's not a choice, Alex. It's a requirement." I could see Maya wavering. Her little hand clutched her spoon, her knuckles white. She looked from our parents, so calm and rational on the surface, to me, frantic and paranoid. The rational part of her wanted to believe that everything was fine, that her parents were right. After dinner, as they were clearing the plates, I grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her into my room. I shut the door, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden silence. "Alex, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice shaky. "Mom and Dad said it's okay. It's just a shot." I sat her down on my bed and looked her straight in the eyes. I had to make her understand. This was my last chance. "Look at them, Maya," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Look at them. They're not Mom and Dad." "Of course they are," she said, but her voice cracked. "They're not. Think about it. When's the last time Dad laughed or Mom sang?" I ticked off the points on my fingers, my hands trembling. They forget things. They stare into nothing. Dad gets angry over nothing, and Mom talks in those weird sounds. They're like they're being controlled. They're like puppets, and the strings are being pulled from inside their own heads. I pointed to the wall, to a picture of our family at the beach last summer. My dad was giving me a piggyback ride, a huge grin on his face. My mom was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. We were a real family then. "Look at that, Maya. That was them. This is something else." Maya's eyes welled up with tears as she stared at the picture. The doubt was starting to set in. "They're just sick, Alex. They'll get better." "No, they won't," I said, my voice filled with a desperate conviction. "They're not sick. Something took them over, and it wants us next." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The vaccine isn't what it seems. It's not a cure. It's an infection. It's what turned them into this, and they're going to use it on us." Maya's lip began to tremble, and she finally let go of the spoon she was still holding. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice a tiny, frightened whisper. "We run," I said, the words a simple and terrifying truth. "We're leaving tonight." Just then, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound started outside my door. It wasn't loud, but it was there, and it was coming from the other side. My mom's voice, flat and serene, cut through the door. "Alex, Maya, time for bed. We'll get ready for your big day tomorrow." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was their last warning. There was no tomorrow. There was only tonight. The scratching at the door stopped. My mom's calm voice, still unnervingly serene, called out again. "We're going to talk about your day, Alex. Let us in." My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Maya's hand found mine, and she squeezed it tight, her knuckles white. Her fear was a living thing now, a silent scream hanging in the air between us. I looked around my room, my mind racing. The window was our only option. I crept toward it, pulling Maya with me. My parents' shuffling footsteps grew louder in the hallway outside my door. It wasn't the sound of two people walking. It was an uneven, heavy drag, like they were barely lifting their feet. I unlatched the window, the click a deafening sound in the quiet room. A blast of cold night air hit my face, a shocking wake-up call. "We can get down from here," I whispered to Maya. "It's not that far to the roof of the porch." "I can't," she whimpered, her eyes wide and panicked. "I'm scared." "You have to," I insisted. "It's the only way." Just then, the doorknob rattled violently. A guttural sound, half grunt, half groan, came from the other side, a sound that wasn't human. It was my mom. I knew it. The calm facade had finally broken. That was all the motivation Maya needed. She moved to the window, her fear overriding her hesitation. I helped her onto the ledge, then lowered her onto the sloping roof of the porch. The shingles were slick with dew, and I held her hand until she was steady. Then, as the doorknob began to turn, I climbed out after her, pulling the window shut behind me. We slid down the roof, the cold wind whipping at our clothes, until we reached the edge. I dropped to the ground, a soft thud on the lawn. I looked up to see Maya frozen on the edge of the roof, looking at me with terror. "Jump," I mouthed, urging her on. "I'll catch you." She took a leap of faith, landing in my arms. We stumbled back, her small body trembling against mine. My parents were in my room now, their shadows looming large and distorted behind the thin curtains. We could hear the thumping as they threw themselves against the glass, a rhythmic beat against the pane. I pulled Maya's hand again, and we ran. We ran across the lawn toward the dark, silent street. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows. We could hear the front door of our house burst open behind us, followed by the heavy, lurching footsteps of my parents as they began their pursuit. They weren't calling our names. They were just making those inhuman, guttural sounds, a low, menacing chorus in the dark. We didn't know where we were going. We just knew we had to run, to get as far away from the house as possible. My sister squeezed my hand, her grip tight and desperate. We weren't a family on a simple escape anymore. We were prey, and our hunters were the two people who were supposed to protect us. The terrifying truth was finally clear. The conspiracy wasn't just in my head. It was real, and it was walking right behind us. We didn't stop running. The streetlight stretched out before us like an endless tunnel of pale, sickly yellow. Behind us, the sounds of our parents' pursuit grew fainter, their inhuman groans and dragging footsteps swallowed by the night. My lungs burned, and a stitch of pain shot through my side, but I didn't dare slow down. Maya, her hand still locked in mine, kept pace beside me, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. We turned a corner and saw it, a beacon of hope in the terrifying darkness. A police cruiser sat at a T-intersection, its red and blue lights flashing in a slow, silent rhythm. My heart leaped into my throat. Help. We had found help. "Over there!" I yelled, pulling Maya in that direction. We sprinted, our feet pounding on the pavement. I was already picturing myself in the back seat, safe, with a kind officer listening to our story. My mom and dad could be sick, and the police could get them help. An officer stood outside the car leaning against the hood holding a clipboard. He was a big guy, broad-shouldered with a calm expression on his face. He saw us running toward him and stood up straight, his face a mask of professional concern. "Hey kids, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I skidded to a stop a few feet away, Maya hiding half behind me, her grip still vise-like on my hand. "It's my parents," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. They're not themselves. They're trying to hurt us." The officer's expression didn't change, not a flicker of surprise or alarm. He just nodded slowly, his eyes, dark and flat in the flashing lights, staring at us. He took a step toward us, and I felt a jolt of unease. He was too calm. I started looking for the signs I'd become so familiar with. A twitch of the fingers, a vacant stare, the subtle, chilling wrongness that was now second nature to me. He held out a hand, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a trap. "Okay, let's get you two in the car. It's safe here." Just as I was about to take another step toward him, Maya's small hand shot out from behind my back. She didn't say a word. She just pointed a trembling finger at the back of the officer's arm, just below the sleeve of his uniform. "Alex," she whispered, her voice a tiny, horrified gasp. "Look." My eyes followed her finger. It was partially covered by his jacket sleeve, but I could clearly see a faint red scar running in a thin line, like a brand, a few inches down from the injection site. It wasn't a fresh wound, it was old and a little faded. I knew that scar. It was the same one that had developed on my mom's arm a few days after she got her shot. At the time, she'd called it a strange reaction to the needle. I had seen her trace it with her fingers, confused by its appearance. "The red mark!" Maya screamed, her voice piercing the night. "The red mark on Mom's arm!" The officer's face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. The pretense was over. His hand shot out, not to guide us, but to grab us. The movement was a blur of speed and unnatural strength. He wasn't a kind police officer anymore. He was one of them. The serene mask had shattered, revealing a predatory focus. "Run!" I screamed, yanking Maya's arm. We turned and sprinted back the way we came, leaving the flashing lights of the cruiser behind. The officer's heavy footsteps thundered on the pavement after us. He was faster than he looked. He was gaining. My mind reeled. It wasn't just my parents. It was a police officer. It could be anyone. We were no longer just running from our family. We were running from the whole world. The conspiracy was real, and it was everywhere. We ran, our feet pounding against the cold pavement as the police officer's heavy footsteps thudded behind us. He wasn't yelling. He was just gaining on us with a terrifying, unnatural speed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a panicked drumbeat in the night. The flashing lights of the cruiser began to sweep the street behind us, a silent, searching eye. "Over there!" I yelled, pulling Maya toward a narrow opening in the bushes lining the street. A dark, gaping hole in the ground led to a drainage ditch. I didn't hesitate. I shoved Maya into the opening, and she tumbled down the muddy slope. I scrambled in after her, the sound of the officer's footsteps just yards away. We landed in the ditch, our bodies a tangle of cold mud and frantic limbs. A narrow concrete tunnel stretched into the darkness. "Crawl," I hissed, pushing her forward. The space was tight and smelled of stagnant water and earth. I could hear the officer's boots on the pavement above us, his shadow blocking the sliver of moonlight. He was looking for us, and he was close. We crawled on our hands and knees, our breath a loud, ragged symphony of fear, until the light from the street faded to a pinprick. The darkness swallowed us whole, but it was a safe darkness. We were alone. We crawled for what felt like an eternity before the tunnel opened into a large storm-drain grate. We pushed it up and slipped out into a back alley, our clothes caked in mud. We didn't stop until we found a brightly lit 24-hour diner. It felt like a sanctuary, a normal place in a world gone mad. We slid into a corner booth, shivering, our eyes darting around. For the first time in what felt like forever, we just sat. We ordered a plate of pancakes, and as the smell of syrup and coffee filled the air, the tension began to ease, just a little. "Maybe we can go to Ashley's house," Maya whispered, her voice still trembling. "Her parents are cool. They'd help us." I shook my head, already shooting the idea down. "No. They'd just call Mom and Dad. They'd think we're crazy and they'd tell them we're here. We can't trust anyone." The realization felt like a heavy weight in my gut. We were completely on our own. As we ate, a couple of police officers walked in, their uniforms crisp and their expressions placid. I froze, but they just went to the counter and ordered coffee, their backs to us. I kept my head down, my fork moving slowly, my eyes locked on the table. Then, the waitress came back to our table to refill our water glasses. Her smile was tired but kind. "You two okay?" she asked. I nodded, my eyes drifting down to her arm. Just below the cuff of her shirt, on her wrist, was a faint red mark, like a brand. The same one I'd seen on my mom and on the officer. My heart seized. The conspiracy was real, and it was everywhere. "Oh, sweetie," the waitress said, looking down at Maya. "You look a little pale." "Are you two vaccinated?" The question hung in the air, a loaded accusation. Maya's eyes shot to mine. I saw the pure terror in them. She clutched her stomach. "I have to go to the bathroom," she gasped, her voice sounding thin and weak. "I don't feel so good." I grabbed her hand. "I'll take her," I said, my voice tight. We slid out of the booth and hurried toward the back of the diner. Just as we did, I saw one of the officers from the counter turn his head, his flat, empty eyes locking onto ours. It was the same officer from the street. He didn't say a word, but his expression was enough. He knew. We slammed the bathroom door shut behind us, locking it. The space was tiny, reeking of disinfectant. A small window, no bigger than a microwave, was set high on the wall. It was our only way out. "Grandma and Grandpa's house," I said, my voice a frantic whisper as I scrambled to lift Maya up to the window. "They're miles away, but they have to be safe." A heavy thud sounded on the door. The officer's voice, now stripped of its calm facade, was a low growl. "Open the door, kids." The knob rattled violently. I shoved Maya's legs through the window, pushing her until she was outside. The knocking on the door became a furious, relentless assault. I could hear the wood splintering. I squeezed through the tiny opening just as the door bucked inward with a loud crack. We landed on the ground, rolling into a dumpster. We were out, but we weren't safe. The world wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a hunting ground, and we were the last two pieces left on the board. The street profit. We burst from the alley behind the diner, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, our bodies scraped and bruised. The police officer's furious shouts faded with every frantic step we took. We ran through a series of darkened backyards, tripping over hoses and avoiding clotheslines, until we found ourselves on a new street far from the diner. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the pounding of my heart in my ears. As we moved from the shadows of one house to the next, I saw him. A lone man standing on a street corner under the flickering yellow glow of a streetlight. He wasn't on his phone. He was holding a stack of leaflets and talking to himself, his voice a low, raspy whisper. He looked disheveled, with a wild-eyed intensity that screamed, "Crazy." "It's a lie! Don't you believe them?" he shouted into the empty street. "The needle isn't for your health. It's for their control." I froze. He was saying the same things I'd been reading online, the same things my parents had dismissed. I felt a strange pull toward him, a magnetic recognition. This man, a street prophet yelling into the night, was one of us. He turned and saw us, his eyes wide with a manic energy locked onto mine. "Hey, you two, are you safe? Did you get the shot?" I pulled Maya behind me, my mind racing. Was this a trick? Was he one of them too? The man's face, however, was filled with genuine concern, not the empty, flat stare I'd grown to fear. "They're trying to inject us," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But we know about it." A wave of relief washed over his face and his shoulders slumped. "You do," he said, the tension leaving his body. "You're one of the few who knows." He looked at our mud-caked clothes and our wide, terrified eyes. "You're running, aren't you? From them?" I nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. My legs felt like lead. "My name's Tyler," he said, his voice soft now and surprisingly normal. "You guys look like you've been through hell. Let me help you." He held out a hand, and I looked at it, searching for the mark, the red scar. There was nothing. His skin was clean. I took his hand, the first human touch that didn't feel like a threat. "My parents," I began, my voice cracking. They got it, and they're not themselves anymore. They tried to get us to take it, too." Tears welled in my eyes. "They're chasing us. The cops, they're chasing us." Tyler's face darkened with understanding, a grim knowing that made my stomach churn. "I know," he said. "Come with me. I have a place, a safe place. The refuge." Tyler led us down a quiet residential street, away from the main road. We stopped in front of a large two-story house. It was old and a little run down, with peeling paint and an unkempt lawn, but a soft, warm light glowed from the windows. It was a stark contrast to the dark and empty houses we'd been passing. Tyler knocked on the door in a specific rhythmic pattern, and after a few moments, the door was unlatched. A woman with a kind, wrinkled face let us in, her eyes filled with a weary understanding. The inside was a bizarre mix of a college dorm and a commune. People were everywhere. They were young and old, some wearing torn clothes, others in suits, all with the same look of haunted alertness in their eyes. They were strangers, but as they saw us, their expressions softened with a shared sense of experience. We were among them. "This is the refuge," Tyler announced to the room. "We've got new members." A dozen pairs of eyes turned to us, silent but curious. People started to gather, their faces kind. A young man offered us blankets, and an older woman handed us cups of warm tea. Tyler helped us into 2 armchairs by a fireplace, the crackling flames a welcome source of warmth. "Tell them your story," he urged me. "Tell them what you saw." I swallowed, my voice still hoarse. I told them everything, a breathless, rambling summary of our flight. I told them about my mom's vacant stares and my dad's strange temper. I told them about the red mark on the policeman's arm and the waitress's wrist. As I spoke, the faces in the room grew grim. Heads nodded in a silent agreement. Some murmured, "The same thing happened to me," or "I saw it too." We were all part of the same chilling story. "We have to get to my grandparents' house," I said, my voice breaking. "They have to be safe. They have to be untouched." A quiet fell over the room. The faces, once so full of shared terror, now held a new, cautious sadness. One of the men, a tall guy with a kind face, spoke up. "We'll do what we can to help you," he said, "but you have to be ready. It's not just a vaccine, it's a disease. And it spreads." The comforting warmth of the fire and the shared understanding of the room slowly started to calm me and Maya. We sat in the armchairs, a bowl of hot soup in our hands, the steam a soothing warmth on our faces. The woman who gave us the tea, an older woman named Brenda, sat beside us, her face kind and concerned. Tyler pulled up a chair across from us, his expression serious. "Your grandparents' house," Tyler began, looking at me. "Do you have an address for it? And what makes you so sure they're not affected?" I took a spoonful of soup, the salty broth a welcome shock to my system. "Yeah, I have the address. And my grandpa, he's the one who got me into all of this in the first place. He's been reading about conspiracies for years. He'd never take that vaccine, not for anything." My voice was filled with a desperate, hopeful certainty. Brenda's kind face hardened for a moment. "We all hope," she said, her voice a low murmur. "But they've been targeting the elderly. My grandmother was in a care facility. They forced it on her. She was gone 2 weeks later." Maya's hand, holding her spoon, started to tremble. Her eyes, wide and watery, shot to mine. The hopeful bubble I'd built around my grandparents' house burst, and a new wave of fear washed over us. Tyler placed a hand on Brenda's shoulder, and she gave him a small, sad nod. "We'll get you there," he said, turning back to me. "But a car is too risky, it's too loud, and it's too easy for them to track. We have to take bikes." The idea seemed so simple and yet so terrifyingly exposed. We would be on the streets, out in the open, but we'd be quiet and agile. It was our best shot. I nodded in agreement. After we finished our soup, Tyler led us to the back of the house, where a small shed held a half-dozen bicycles. He and Brenda grabbed 2, and I found a third that was small enough for Maya to ride. The tires were a little flat, but they were serviceable. The 3 of us stood in the cold night air, the bikes a silent promise of escape. Tyler pulled out his phone, the address to my grandparents' house already pulled up on a mapping app that had been pre-downloaded. "It's a long way," he said, his eyes scanning the route. "We'll have to be careful. Stay close to me and Brenda. No talking. We ride in the shadows." I helped Maya onto her bike, her small hands gripping the handlebars tight. Her eyes, filled with fear, looked up at me. I squeezed her hand reassuringly, a silent promise that I wouldn't let anything happen to her. We were a unit now, 2 kids and 2 strangers on a mission to find the only people left we could trust. With one final look at the lit windows of the refuge, we pushed off into the night. We were back on our own, but this time we had a plan. The streets were dark and silent. and the only sound was the soft hum of our tires on the asphalt as we pedaled away from the light, deeper into the darkness. The night air was a cold shock against our faces as we rode, the only sound the soft whir of our bike chains and the steady thump of our hearts. We kept to the shadows of the residential streets, the streetlights illuminating our path in uneven, ghostly pools of yellow. My bike's handlebars were slick with sweat. Maya rode a few feet in front of me, her small shoulders hunched with a fear that had become a constant companion. Tyler and Brenda led the way, their silhouettes ahead, silent and focused. We rode for what felt like hours, passing quiet, dark houses. A false sense of security began to creep in. Maybe it was just our neighborhood, our little corner of the world, that had been affected. Maybe we were going to make it. Then we turned a corner, and the silence was broken by the flicker of a television screen from a living room window. A family sat on a couch, bathed in the blue glow. They weren't talking. They weren't even watching the screen. Their heads were tilted at a strange, uniform angle, their eyes fixed on something unseen. Their hands, resting on their laps, twitched with a faint, rhythmic pulse. The sight was a punch to the gut. The horror wasn't something you ran from. It was something you rode past. It was everywhere. I glanced at Tyler. He didn't even turn his head. He just gave a slight, resigned nod, a silent acknowledgement that he saw it too. We kept riding, a grim parade of quiet observers. The next few blocks were a silent gauntlet of quiet dread. A man in a bathrobe was standing in his yard, staring at a patch of dead grass, his posture stiff and unnatural. He didn't blink as we rode by. A woman was slowly sweeping her front porch, but her movements were jerky and mechanical, her broom hitting the same spot on the concrete over and over again. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. These were people just going about their daily lives, but the person behind the eyes was gone. They were just empty shells, vessels for something cold and wrong. I looked at Maya. She was still riding, but her head was down and her shoulders were shaking. She knew. She didn't have to see it all to feel it. The world had gone hollow. My paranoia, once my private hell, was now my only defense. I scanned every window, every porch, every parked car, looking for the telltale signs. The twitching, the vacant stare, the flat, expressionless face. I felt like a hunter in a forest full of quiet, lurking predators. We passed an old woman sitting on her porch swing. The swing moved back and forth with a slow, hypnotic creak. She wasn't holding anything. She was just staring at the road ahead, her eyes like glass. As we passed, her head slowly, almost robotically, turned to follow us. Her face remained a blank slate, but the motion was deliberate, focused. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just a shell. She saw us. She knew we were here. Tyler, sensing my panic, pedaled faster, but it was too late. From a dark alley ahead, a figure stepped out, a tall man with his hands stuffed in his pockets. He was too still. A second figure emerged from behind a parked car, and then a third. They didn't move. They just stood there, a silent blockade. "Turn around," Tyler hissed, his voice a low command. We swerved, trying to turn our bikes around, but another figure stepped out from a front yard we'd just passed. We were surrounded, trapped. The quiet dread was over. Now, it was a fight. The infected, once so placid and still, were now moving with a terrifying purpose. They didn't run. They just walked, a slow, methodical advance, their footsteps heavy and even on the pavement. Their eyes were dark and emotionless, fixed on us. They were hurting us. "We have to go through them," Brenda said, her voice strained. "It's the only way." I looked at Maya, her face pale in the dim light. I gripped my handlebars, my knuckles white. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. The moment the monsters came for us. "Go!" Tyler yelled. "Go! Go! Go!" I pushed on my pedals with all my might. We shot forward, a small, desperate team of 4 against a wall of a dozen empty faces. The infected didn't react with a shout. They didn't run. They just moved, their hands reaching out, their fingers twitching in anticipation. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a man who lunged at me with a startling burst of speed. His hand brushed against my jacket. I could feel the clammy cold of his touch, a feeling that will haunt me forever. Maya shrieked as an infected woman reached for her fingers just inches from her arm. Tyler, riding beside her, knocked the woman's arm away with his own, a small, courageous act of defiance. Brenda, a wall of determination, rode behind us, making sure no one got too close. We burst through the blockade, leaving the quiet, methodical monsters behind us. The adrenaline surge was a wildfire in my veins. We didn't slow down until we turned onto a new street, a main road bustling with the faint sounds of distant cars. We were safe for now, but the silence of the night was shattered. A single, high-pitched shriek cut through the air, followed by another, then another, a chilling, triumphant sound from the infected. They weren't just husks. They were connected, and they knew we were on the move. The fight was over, but the hunt had just begun. We pedaled for what felt like an eternity, the high-pitched shriek of the infected a fading echo in the night. The city's landscape slowly gave way to the sprawling, wooded suburbs where my grandparents lived. Every shadow was a potential monster, every distant sound a potential threat. Tyler and Brenda, a silent and reassuring presence, rode ahead, navigating the dark roads with a quiet confidence that I desperately clung to. We finally arrived at a quiet cul-de-sac. The air here was cooler, cleaner. And there it was, my grandparents' house. It was a small, cozy ranch home, but the yard was surrounded by a tall, black iron fence with a locked gate. It was completely dark, a silent fortress in the middle of the night. "This is it," I whispered, my voice hoarse. My heart was a drum in my chest, a mix of desperate hope and a terrifying new fear that they might not be home, or worse, that they might have succumbed. "I'll get it," Tyler said, but I shook my head, my mind already made up. This was my family. This was my last chance. I got off my bike, my legs shaky with exhaustion, and scrambled up the side of the fence. I hoisted myself over the top, the sharp metal digging into my palms, and dropped quietly onto the lawn. Maya, still on her bike, watched from the other side of the gate, her eyes wide. I crept toward the front door, a million terrible scenarios racing through my mind. I took a deep breath, and with a trembling hand, I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. The silence was deafening. Just as I was about to give up, a light flicked on in the living room window, casting a warm, welcoming glow onto the front porch. I let out a shaky sigh of relief, but before the thought could even form, the front door burst open. The sudden blast of light blinded me, and I raised my hand to my eyes. "What the heck are you?" a gruff voice began, cut short by the sight of a shotgun being pointed directly at me. "No, no, no!" I screamed, a wave of pure terror washing over me. "Grandpa, it's me. It's Alex." My grandpa's eyes, narrowed and suspicious, widened in shock. The shotgun's barrel wavered, and a second later, it was lowered. "Alex?" he said, his voice a disbelieving gasp. He rushed forward, his arms wrapping around me in a tight, crushing hug. "What in the blazes are you doing here? You're a mess. What happened?" "Grandpa, it's a long story," I stammered, my voice cracking with relief. "We're being chased. We need help." "Alex! Grandpa!" Maya's voice, a desperate, tearful cry, came from behind the gate. My grandpa finally pulled back, looking at my face, then at my clothes, and finally to the street where Maya and our two new companions stood. He rushed to the gate, fiddling with the lock, his hands still trembling. "Brenda and Tyler," I said quickly, introducing them. "They helped us get here. They're safe. They know." The gate swung open, and Maya ran into my grandpa's arms. He held her tight, his bewildered expression turning to one of deep concern. "What is going on out there, son?" he asked, looking at me. "What is all this madness?" Just then, my grandmother, a warm, soft woman, appeared at the front door, a look of kind confusion on her face. "Mark, what's all the commotion? The kettle's on. Are you going to invite your guests in?" she said, her voice a gentle contrast to the chaos. "I just baked some cookies." My grandpa, still shell-shocked, gestured for all of us to come inside. The five of us walked into the warm, comforting light of the living room, a safe haven from the nightmare world we just left behind. We sat around a large oak table as my grandma poured us mugs of hot tea. The warmth, the normalcy of it all, was a stark and beautiful contrast to the terrifying hours we had just endured. "Start from the beginning," my grandpa said, his voice now calm, his eyes fixed on mine. "Tell me everything." And so, surrounded by the only people left in the world I trusted, I began to tell the story of a boy who was dismissed as a paranoid lunatic, only to discover that his greatest fear was real, and it had finally come for his family.